The stagecoach lurched violently over another rut in the dusty road, and Eleanor Zimmerman clutched the worn leather seat with white-knuckled hands, her stomach churning not from the motion, but from the sight of the horses pulling them toward Douglas, Wyoming Territory, in this summer of 1878. Through the window, she could see their powerful haunches rippling with muscle, their hooves thundering against the hard, packed earth, and she felt her breath catch in her throat the way it had since she was 7 years old. The other passenger, an older woman with kind eyes, had tried making conversation for the first hour but had given up when Eleanor's responses became increasingly distracted. Eleanor couldn't help it. Every snort from the horses, every toss of their massive heads made her flinch. She pressed herself further into the corner of the coach, trying to focus on anything else, trying to remember why she had agreed to this arrangement in the first place. The advertisement had seemed like providence when she had found it tucked between the pages of a newspaper someone had left at the boarding house in Philadelphia. Rancher in Douglas, Wyoming Territory, seeks correspondence with respectable woman for matrimony. Must be of good character and willing to embrace frontier life. The words had blurred as she read them over and over, her future in Philadelphia looking bleaker by the day. The factory where she worked had cut wages again. Her room at the boarding house was barely affordable. And at 23, she had no prospects and no family left after her mother's death the previous winter. So she had written to Benjamin Irwin, pouring her heart into carefully crafted letters that spoke of her skills in keeping house, her education, her desire for a different life. She had been honest about most things, her modest upbringing, her work ethic, her faith. But she had not mentioned the horses. How could she explain in a letter that the mere sight of a horse sent waves of panic through her body? That she had not been near one since the day her father's draft horse had reared up suddenly, hooves flashing, and crushed him against the stable wall while 7-year-old Eleanor watched in frozen horror. The stagecoach began to slow, and Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Through the window, she could see buildings taking shape through the dust, the rough frontier town of Douglas spreading before her like something from a dream or perhaps a nightmare. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with wooden buildings that looked like they had been thrown up quickly and without much concern for permanence. Men on horseback rode past, and she had to close her eyes. When the stage finally stopped in front of a building marked station, Eleanor forced herself to breathe slowly, deliberately. The driver was climbing down, his boots hitting the ground with decisive thuds. The older woman gathered her bags and gave Eleanor a sympathetic smile. "First time out west, dear," Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. "You will get used to it. It is different, but there is a freedom here you would not find back east." Then she was gone, and Eleanor was alone in the coach, knowing she could not stay there forever. She smoothed down her traveling dress, a sensible gray wool that was far too warm for the August heat, and checked that her bonnet was straight. Everything she owned was packed into 2 worn carpetbags at her feet. She picked them up, surprised her hands were not shaking more than they were, and stepped down from the coach. The sun hit her full force, and she had to squint against the brightness. The air was different here, dry and carrying scents she did not recognize, sage and dust and something wild. The street was busier than she had expected, with wagons and riders moving past, and she pressed herself against the side of the stage station, trying to calm her racing heart. "Miss Zimmerman." The voice was deep and uncertain, and she turned to find a man standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-browned skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long, curling at his collar, and his eyes were an unexpected gray-blue, like storm clouds over water. He looked to be perhaps 30, his face weathered but kind, with small lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. "Mr. Irwin." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He nodded, and she saw relief cross his features. "I was worried you might have changed your mind. The stage was delayed, and I thought perhaps—" He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "I am glad you are here." Eleanor felt a flutter of something that was not quite fear in her chest. His letters had been kind and thoughtful, written in a careful hand that suggested education despite his frontier life. Looking at him now, she thought he seemed honest, which was more than she had dared hope for. "The journey was long but uneventful," she said, setting down her bags for a moment to ease her aching arms. Benjamin stepped forward immediately. "Let me take those for you." He reached for her carpetbags, his movements careful, as though he was afraid of startling her. "My wagon is just down the street. I thought we could stop by the boarding house so you could freshen up, and then perhaps you would join me for supper. We could talk and get to know each other a bit before the wedding tomorrow, if that suits you." Wedding tomorrow. The words made everything suddenly very real. She had agreed to marry this stranger, to build a life with him in this foreign place, and she barely knew anything about him beyond what could be conveyed in letters. But she nodded, because what else could she do? "That would be fine, thank you." Benjamin smiled, and she saw that her impression had been correct. The smile reached his eyes, warming them, and for the first time since she had boarded the train in Philadelphia weeks ago, she felt a small measure of hope. He led the way down the wooden sidewalk, and she followed, trying not to notice the horses tied to hitching posts along the way, trying not to hear their snorts and stamps. But then they reached Benjamin's wagon, and she stopped dead in her tracks. The horse in the traces was enormous, a bay with a white star on its forehead, and even standing still it seemed to radiate power. Its tail swished at flies, and its ears swiveled toward them as they approached. "This is Ranger," Benjamin said, reaching out to pat the horse's neck with obvious affection. "He is steady as they come, best horse I have ever had." Eleanor could not move. Her feet felt rooted to the spot, and her breath was coming too fast. The horse turned its head to look at her, its large dark eye fixing on her, and she felt 7 years old again, small and helpless. "Miss Zimmerman," Benjamin's voice held concern now. "Are you all right? You have gone pale." She tried to speak, but her throat had closed up. The horse shifted its weight, and she took an involuntary step backward. Benjamin set down her bags and moved toward her slowly. "Eleanor, what is wrong?" The use of her first name, though premature, somehow helped ground her. She forced herself to take a breath, then another. "I should have told you in my letters," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am terrified of horses." The words hung in the air between them, and she watched his expression shift from concern to confusion to something like dismay. Of course he was dismayed. He was a rancher in Wyoming Territory, where horses were not a luxury but a necessity. She might as well have told him she was terrified of breathing. "Terrified," he repeated, as though he had not heard correctly. "I had an accident as a child. My father was killed by a horse. I have not been able to go near one since." The admission came out in a rush, and she felt tears pricking at her eyes. "I am sorry. I know I should have told you, but I was afraid you would not want me to come if you knew." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, looking between her and the horse. Then he did something unexpected. He walked back to the wagon, unhitched Ranger with practiced efficiency, and led the horse away from them to the hitching post outside a nearby shop. When he returned, his expression was thoughtful rather than angry. "You are right that you should have told me," he said quietly, "but I understand why you did not. Come on." The boarding house is only 2 blocks. I will carry your bags and we can walk. But your horse can stay there for a while. We need to talk, Miss Zimmerman, and you need to sit down before you fall down. He was right. Her knees felt unsteady, and the shock of the moment had left her light-headed. She let him guide her down the sidewalk, away from Ranger, and tried to process what had just happened. He had not yelled at her or called off the wedding immediately. That had to count for something. The boarding house was a tidy 2-story building painted white, with a porch across the front and curtains in the windows. A sign proclaimed it to be Mrs. Campbell's rooms for respectable ladies and gentlemen. Benjamin held the door for her, and they stepped into a dim, blessedly cool interior. An older woman appeared from a back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Irwin, I have been expecting you. This must be your intended." "Yes, madam." "Miss Eleanor Zimmerman, may I present Mrs. Campbell? She has kindly agreed to let you stay here until after the wedding." Mrs. Campbell looked Eleanor over with sharp but not unkind eyes. "You look done in, poor thing. Let me show you to your room. I have a basin of water and towels ready. You can freshen up, and then perhaps you two can talk in the parlor. I will bring tea." Eleanor could have kissed her for understanding without needing explanation. She followed Mrs. Campbell up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room with a single bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Her bags appeared moments later, brought up by Benjamin, and then she was alone. She sat on the edge of the bed and let herself shake for a few minutes, releasing the tension that had built up during the encounter with the horse. Then she stood, poured water from the pitcher into the basin, and washed her face and hands. She unpinned her bonnet and smoothed her dark brown hair, which had come loose from its careful arrangement during the journey. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she saw a pale face with brown eyes too large for her delicate features, a small nose and lips that were pressed tight with anxiety. "You are already here," she told her reflection. "You cannot go back. You have to make this work." Squaring her shoulders, she made her way back downstairs to find Benjamin waiting in the parlor, a small room furnished with a sofa and 2 chairs that had seen better days but were clean and comfortable. Mrs. Campbell brought tea as promised, then disappeared with a meaningful look that said she would not be listening at doors. Eleanor sat in one of the chairs, and Benjamin took the other. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped between them. "Tell me what happened. With your father, I mean, if you can." She had not expected the question, but perhaps it made sense. If they were to marry, he had a right to understand. So she told him, haltingly at first and then with more confidence, about her father's stable, the delivery horse that had seemed gentle, the sudden loud noise that had startled it into rearing. She told him about watching her father go down, about the screaming, her mother's, her own, about how he had lived for 3 days before the internal injuries took him. She told him about the nightmares that had lasted for years, about how even now the sight of a horse could send her back to that moment of helpless terror. Benjamin listened without interrupting, his expression growing more thoughtful as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I own a ranch," he said finally. "A small one but growing. I raise cattle and horses. My livelihood depends on horses, Miss Zimmerman. I ride every day multiple horses. They are how I work, how I travel, how I live out here." "I know," she whispered, feeling her hopes crumbling. "I understand if you want me to go back. I have enough money set aside for the return fare just in case." "I did not say that." His voice was firm. "But I need to understand what we are dealing with. You cannot ride at all. I have not tried since I was a child. And being near them makes you panic." "Yes." He sat back, running a hand through his hair. This is not what I expected, I will not lie, but I have been alone for 5 years now, running that ranch by myself, and I am tired of the loneliness. Your letters, Miss Zimmerman, they gave me hope that I might have more than just work in my life. You wrote about wanting a family, about building something lasting. That is what I want too. Eleanor felt tears threatening again, but for a different reason. Even though I am afraid of horses. That is a problem, I will not pretend otherwise, but fear can be overcome. If you are willing to try, I am willing to teach you. Teach me to be around horses. To ride eventually. It would not be easy and it would have to be at your pace, but I think it is possible. You are here now in a place where you cannot avoid horses. Either you learn to live with them, or you spend your life afraid. That does not seem like much of a life to me. His words were blunt but not unkind, and she appreciated his honesty. He was right, of course. She could not live in Wyoming Territory and avoid horses. It would be like trying to avoid the sun. I do not know if I can, she said honestly. The fear is so strong. But you got on that stagecoach knowing it was drawn by horses. That took courage. I rode inside. I did not have to look at them much. But you did it. That is a start. He leaned forward again, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I am not going to lie to you or make promises I cannot keep. This will be hard. But I am a patient man, Miss Zimmerman, and if you are willing to try, I will work with you every day until you can at least tolerate being around horses. Riding can come later or never if it proves too much, but you have to be willing to try. Eleanor thought about her options. She could take her money and go back to Philadelphia, back to the factory and the boarding house and the slow starvation of a life without hope. Or she could stay here, marry this man who seemed kind and honest, and face her fear head-on. When she thought of it that way, the choice seemed clear. I will try, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I cannot promise I will succeed, but I will try. Benjamin smiled, that warm expression that reached his eyes. That is all I can ask. Now shall we start over? I am Benjamin Irwin, though most folks call me Ben. I am 31 years old. I own a ranch about 5 miles outside of town, and I am pleased to meet you properly, Miss Zimmerman. She found herself smiling back despite everything. I am Eleanor Zimmerman, though I go by Ellie with friends. I am 23 years old. I am good at cooking and keeping house, though I have never done so on a ranch, and I am terrified but hopeful about this new life. Ellie, he said, testing the name. I like that. Would you prefer I call you that? Yes, I think I would. They talked then, really talked, about things beyond what could be conveyed in letters. He told her about his ranch, the Broken Creek, named for the stream that ran through his property and split around a boulder halfway through. He had built the house himself over the course of 2 years, and it was modest but solid. He had 200 head of cattle, a small herd of horses he was training to sell, and dreams of expanding. He had come west from Ohio 8 years ago, looking for opportunity, and had saved every penny working for other ranchers until he could buy his own land. She told him about her life in Philadelphia, about losing her father and then her mother, about the factory work that had slowly ground down her spirit. She told him about her love of reading, her skill with a needle, her ability to make a meal from almost nothing. She did not embellish or pretend to be something she was not, and he seemed to appreciate that. By the time Mrs. Campbell came to tell them that supper was ready, Eleanor felt as though she had known Benjamin far longer than a few hours. There was an ease between them that surprised her, a sense that they might actually be able to build something together despite the obstacle of her fear. They ate at a small restaurant down the street, simple but well-prepared food served by a cheerful woman who clearly knew Benjamin and was curious about Eleanor. He introduced her as his intended, and Eleanor saw the woman's expression soften into approval. After the meal, Benjamin walked her back to the boarding house as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that she had never seen back east. "The wedding is set for 2 o'clock tomorrow at the church," he said as they stood on the porch of the boarding house. "Reverend Matthews is expecting us. After that, I will take you out to the ranch. I know you are worried about the journey, but it is only 5 miles and I will drive as slowly as you need." "Thank you," she said, meaning it, "for being understanding today, for not sending me away." "I considered it for about half a minute," he admitted with a rueful smile. "But then I thought about how frightened you must have been, traveling all this way knowing you would be surrounded by the very thing that terrifies you. That takes a kind of courage I respect." He reached out and took her hand, his palm rough with calluses but his touch gentle. "We will figure this out together, Ellie. I promise." That night, lying in the narrow bed at the boarding house, Eleanor stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine her future. Tomorrow she would marry a man she had just met. Then she would go to a ranch where horses were everywhere, an inescapable part of daily life. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety, but underneath it was something else, something that felt almost like excitement. Ben, was not what she had expected. He was kind but not soft, understanding but not willing to simply accept her limitations without question. He wanted her to try, believe she could overcome her fear, and was willing to help her do it. That faith, coming from a stranger who had every right to be angry with her for not disclosing such a fundamental problem, moved her more than she could say. The morning of her wedding day dawned clear and hot. Mrs. Campbell helped her dress in the one good dress she owned, a dark blue calico with white trim that had been her mother's Sunday best. It was old-fashioned and obviously not expensive, but it was clean and pressed, and Mrs. Campbell assured her she looked lovely. Benjamin arrived promptly at 1:30, dressed in clean trousers and a white shirt with a string tie, his hair still damp from washing. He had shaved carefully, and Eleanor could see a small nick on his jaw where the razor had slipped. The sight of it, so human and vulnerable, made her feel oddly tender toward him. They walked to the church together, Mrs. Campbell accompanying them as witness along with the town's deputy, a grizzled man named Foster who served as the second required witness. Reverend Matthews was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles who looked them both over carefully before beginning the ceremony. The service was brief and simple. Eleanor found herself repeating vows that felt both momentous and surreal, promising to love and honor a man she had met yesterday. But when Benjamin took her hand and slipped a simple gold band onto her finger when he said, "I do," in that steady, confident voice, she felt something shift inside her. This was real. She was married now, bound to this man in this place. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Matthews said, and Benjamin leaned down carefully, pressing a chaste kiss to her lips. It was brief and gentle, appropriate for a church, but Eleanor felt the warmth of it spread through her chest. "Hello, Mrs. Irwin," Benjamin said softly, just for her. "Hello, Mr. Irwin," she replied, and they shared a smile that felt like a secret between them. After the ceremony, Benjamin thanked the reverend and the witnesses, then turned to Eleanor. "Are you ready to go home? Home?" The word should have filled her with anxiety, thinking of the journey ahead, but instead she found herself nodding. "Yes, I am ready." The wagon was waiting outside, Ranger hitched and patient in his traces. Eleanor felt her chest tighten at the sight of him, but she forced herself to keep breathing. Benjamin noticed, of course. He seemed to notice everything. "I will help you up," he said. "You do not have to look at him, just focus on me." She did as he suggested, keeping her eyes on his face as he lifted her by the waist and set her on the wagon seat. His strength was casual, effortless, and she found herself thinking that she felt safe with him, at least when horses were not involved. He climbed up beside her and gathered the reins. "I am going to start driving now," he said calmly. "Ranger is very gentle, and he knows the way home. There is nothing to be afraid of." Eleanor gripped the edge of the seat and kept her eyes straight ahead as the wagon began to move. She could hear the horses' hooves, the jingle of the harness, but she forced herself not to look. Ben kept up a steady stream of conversation as they drove, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the town, the people who lived there, the shops and businesses. His voice was soothing, and she found herself relaxing slightly, though her knuckles remained white on the seat. The town gave way to open land, vast stretches of grass and sage broken by rocky outcroppings and distant hills. The sky seemed impossibly huge, and the air had a clarity she had never experienced in the crowded, smoky streets of Philadelphia. Despite her fear, despite the strangeness of everything, she found it beautiful. "There," Ben said after perhaps 40 minutes. "That is Broken Creek." She followed his pointing finger and saw a small cluster of buildings nestled in a shallow valley. A house, a barn, several smaller outbuildings, all surrounded by fencing. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see several horses in a corral near the barn. Even from this distance, the sight of them made her tense. "It is not much yet," Ben said, and she heard uncertainty in his voice. "But it is solid and it is ours now. I hope you will be happy here." "It looks nice," she said honestly. The house was small but neat, with a porch across the front and a stone chimney rising from one end. "Did you really build it yourself?" "With some help from neighbors when it came time to raise the walls and set the roof. But yes, mostly myself. I wanted it done right." As they drew closer, Eleanor could see the care that had gone into the construction. The logs were well fitted, the windows had glass rather than oiled paper, and the door was solid and hung straight. Around the house, someone had planted what looked like an attempt at a garden, though the harsh climate had not been kind to it. Ben drove the wagon past the house toward the barn, and Eleanor's breath quickened. There were horses in the corral, 5 or 6 of them, all watching the approaching wagon with interest. Ben seemed to realize her distress because he brought Ranger to a stop some distance from the corral. "Wait here," he said. "I will unhitch Ranger and put him in the far paddock. You do not have to get down until I come back for you." She nodded, grateful beyond words. She watched as he climbed down and went to Ranger's head, talking to the horse in a low voice she could not quite hear. His movements were confident and practiced, the actions of a man completely at ease with these animals that terrified her. He led Ranger away, disappearing behind the barn, and Eleanor was left alone in the wagon seat. The horses in the corral had lost interest and gone back to whatever horses did when they were not working. She tried to look at them objectively to see what Ben saw when he looked at them. They were beautiful, she could admit that intellectually. Their coats gleamed in the sunlight, their movements were graceful, and they seemed content. But every time one of them moved suddenly or tossed its head, she felt her heart race. Ben returned after a few minutes and came to help her down from the wagon. This time when he lifted her, he held her a moment longer than necessary, his hands firm on her waist. "You did well," he said. "I know that was hard for you. I did nothing but sit there. You sat there without panicking. That is more than you did yesterday. Progress." He set her down gently and offered his arm. "Come on. Let me show you the house." The house was simple but larger than she had expected inside. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace for cooking and heating. There was a good-sized table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, and shelves along one wall holding dishes and supplies. A door at the back led to a bedroom, which held a double bed with a real mattress, a wardrobe, and a washstand. Another small room off the bedroom had clearly been intended as a child's room someday, though it currently held storage. "It is not fancy," Ben said, watching her face anxiously, "but I have tried to make it comfortable." "It is wonderful," Eleanor said, and she meant it. After years in a cramped boarding house room with paper-thin walls, this felt spacious and private. "You have done a remarkable job." She could see him relax at her words. "I am glad you think so. I worried it would not be enough coming from a city. Philadelphia is not as grand as you might think, not the parts where I lived anyway." She walked to the window and looked out at the land stretching in every direction. "This is beautiful, Ben, truly." He came to stand beside her, and they looked out together in companionable silence. Then he cleared his throat. "I thought since this is your first day here I would handle the evening chores myself. You can settle in, get your bearings. Tomorrow I will start showing you around properly." "And the horses?" she asked quietly. "Tomorrow," he confirmed. "One step at a time. For today, just get comfortable in your new home." He left her then, heading out to do whatever needed doing on a ranch at the end of the day. Eleanor spent the time exploring the house more thoroughly, finding that Ben had stocked the kitchen surprisingly well. There was flour and cornmeal, dried beans and salt pork, coffee and sugar. Not a large variety, but enough to work with. She found an apron hanging on a peg and tied it on, then set about making supper. By the time Ben returned, she had beans cooking and cornbread baking in the Dutch oven set in the coals of the fireplace. She had also found the makings for coffee and had a pot ready. He stopped in the doorway, looking surprised. "You did not have to do that." "I wanted to. I need to be useful, to feel like I am contributing." He washed up at the basin near the door, then joined her at the table. The meal was simple, but he ate with obvious appreciation, complimenting her cooking in a way that seemed genuine rather than merely polite. They talked about small things, what supplies they had, what she might need from town, how she might want to arrange the house. It felt almost domestic, almost normal, except for the undercurrent of awareness that they were strangers, that this was their wedding night. When the meal was finished and the dishes washed, an awkward silence fell. Eleanor found herself fidgeting with the dish towel, not sure what was expected. Ben seemed to sense her discomfort. "Ellie," he said gently, "we have known each other for one day. I do not expect, that is, I think we should take our time getting to know each other before." He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "What I mean is, I can sleep out in the barn for a while if that would make you more comfortable." Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude and something else, disappointment perhaps, though she was not sure why. "That seems sensible," she said. "Thank you for understanding. Though I will not lie to you," he added with a slight smile. "I am hoping that eventually you will want me to stay. But there is no rush." That night, Eleanor lay alone in the big bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. She could hear cattle lowing in the distance, the wind moving through the grass, an owl calling. It was so different from the city sounds she had grown up with, the voices and wagons and endless human noise. Here, it felt like she was at the edge of the world, isolated and exposed. But she was not afraid, she realized. Alone in the dark in this strange place, she felt oddly safe. Ben had made her feel that way, with his patience and his honesty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the horses he wanted her to face, but tonight she could just be. She woke to the smell of coffee and found Ben already up, having come in quietly to start the fire and put the pot on. He looked rumpled and slightly uncomfortable, and she guessed the barn had not provided the best sleeping arrangements. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I did not wake you." "Not at all." "What time is it?" "Just after dawn. I usually start early, but you can sleep later if you want." No reason for you to keep ranch hours right away. But Eleanor was already up, reaching for her dress. I want to learn. If I am going to be a rancher's wife, I should understand what that means. He looked pleased at that. All right then. Get dressed and have some breakfast. Then, if you are willing, I would like to start with the horses. Her stomach clenched, but she nodded. I said I would try. I meant it. After a quick breakfast of leftover cornbread and coffee, Ben led her outside. The morning was cool, the sun just starting to burn off the night's chill. The horses in the corral were already moving around, anticipating their morning feed. Ben stopped well back from the corral, far enough that Eleanor did not feel immediately threatened. "This is where we will start," he said. "Not today, maybe not for many days, but eventually I want to get you comfortable just being near them. For now, we are just going to stand here and watch. That is all. Can you do that?" Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, though she was not cold. "I can try." "Tell me what you see when you look at them." She forced herself to look at the horses, really look. "I see animals that are very large, that could hurt me." "They could," he agreed. "A horse can be dangerous if mishandled or frightened, but look closer. What else do you see?" She tried to see past her fear. "They are beautiful. Their coats shine, they move gracefully." "Good, what else?" "Some of them are eating hay, one is rolling in the dust, they seem calm." "Exactly. These horses are not upset or aggressive. They are just living their lives being horses." "Now, what do you hear?" Eleanor closed her eyes, listening. "Them chewing. Their hooves on the ground. One of them is breathing heavily." "That is Copper, the roan in the back. He always sounds like that, nothing to worry about. Now open your eyes and keep looking. We are just going to stand here for a while. If you feel too frightened, tell me and we will go back to the house. But try to stay as long as you can." They stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes. Eleanor's heart raced at first, but gradually, as nothing happened, as the horses continued to ignore them, she felt herself calming slightly. The animals were just standing there, not threatening her, not even particularly interested in her. "That is enough for today," Ben said finally. "You did well. I just stood here. You stood and looked and did not run. That is progress." He put a hand on her shoulder, a brief, warm touch. "Tomorrow we will do it again, maybe for a little longer. Small steps, Ellie. That is how you overcome fear." The days began to form a pattern. Each morning after breakfast, Ben would bring Eleanor outside, and they would stand at a distance from the horses. Sometimes he would talk to her about them, explaining their personalities and quirks. Copper the roan was gentle but lazy. Sage, a gray mare, was smart and occasionally stubborn. Blaze, a chestnut with a white face, was the most energetic and needed lots of work to keep him from getting bored and causing trouble. As he talked, Eleanor found herself becoming curious despite her fear. These were not faceless threats but individuals, each with their own character. Ben spoke about them with affection and respect, and she began to understand that for him, horses were not just tools but partners. After a week, Ben suggested they move closer. Eleanor's heart hammered as they walked up to the corral fence, but she made herself do it. The horses looked bigger up close, more real, and she had to resist the urge to back away. But Ben stood beside her, solid and calm, and that helped. "Hold out your hand," he said. "Flat like this." He demonstrated, his palm open and level. "Sage likes attention. She might come over." "I do not think I can. Just try. I am right here." With a trembling hand, Eleanor reached out, copying his position. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Sage, the gray mare, lifted her head and looked at them with interest. She took a few steps toward the fence, and Eleanor had to fight every instinct that screamed at her to run. "Stay still," Ben murmured. "Let her come to you." Sage approached the fence and stretched her neck over, her nose heading toward Eleanor's hand. Eleanor could see the mare's nostrils flaring as she sniffed. could see the dark eye regarding her with what seemed like curiosity. Then, very gently, Sage's soft nose touched Eleanor's palm. Eleanor gasped but held still. The sensation was not what she expected. The mare's nose was velvet soft and warm, her breath stirring the air around Eleanor's hand. Sage snuffled at her palm, searching for treats, then, finding none, simply stood there allowing the contact. "You are touching a horse," Ben said quietly. "You are doing it, Ellie." She was. Despite the fear that still thrummed through her veins, despite the instinct to pull away, she was standing here touching a horse. Tears pricked at her eyes, and she was not even sure why. Relief, perhaps. Pride. The sense that maybe, just maybe, she could do this. Sage eventually lost interest and wandered away, and Eleanor lowered her hand, looking at it as though it belonged to someone else. "I did it," she whispered. "You did." Ben's voice was warm with pride. "That was brave, Ellie. I know it does not feel like much, but that was incredibly brave." They went back to the house, and Eleanor found her hands were shaking from the adrenaline. But underneath the fear, there was a tiny spark of something else. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of confidence. Over the following weeks, the interactions with the horses became gradually more comfortable. Ben never pushed her too far or too fast, always respecting her boundaries while gently encouraging her to expand them. She learned to touch the horses through the fence, first just their noses and then their necks. She learned their names and began to see them as individuals. Meanwhile, she and Ben were building a life together. She took over the cooking and the housework, finding satisfaction in making the house cleaner and more comfortable. She mended his clothes, which had been patched clumsily by his own hand, and made curtains for the windows from fabric they bought on a trip into Douglas. That trip had been challenging, requiring another wagon ride, but she had done it without panicking. Ben was patient with her in everything, not just with the horses. He answered her endless questions about ranching, about Wyoming, about his past. She learned that he had grown up on a farm in Ohio, the youngest of 4 brothers, and had come west seeking his own place in the world. He had worked hard, saved carefully, and built everything he had through sheer determination. In turn, she told him more about her life, about her parents and the happiness she had known before her father's death, about the slow decline after as her mother struggled to make ends meet. She told him about the factory, about the other girls who worked there, some kind and some cruel, about the exhaustion of barely surviving. "You will never have to go back to that," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Whatever happens, I will make sure you are provided for." It had been a month since the wedding, and Eleanor was beginning to feel like she belonged here. The fear of horses was still present, but it no longer dominated her every moment. And her feelings for Ben had grown from cautious respect to something warmer, something that made her heart beat faster when he smiled at her. She thought he might feel the same way. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her flush. When they accidentally touched, passing each other in the small house, he would linger just a moment longer than necessary. At night, she found herself wishing he would stop sleeping in the barn, but she was not quite brave enough to say so. The breakthrough with the horses came unexpectedly. Eleanor had been outside hanging laundry when she heard a commotion from the corral. Blaze, the energetic chestnut, had somehow gotten his halter caught on a fence post and was pulling against it, panicking. Ben was out on the range checking cattle, and there was no one else around. Eleanor dropped the wet shirt she had been holding and ran toward the corral without thinking. She could see that Blaze was going to hurt himself if he kept pulling, could see the panic in his eyes as he fought against the restraint. And suddenly, all she could think about was stopping him from hurting himself the way her father's horse had hurt her father. She climbed through the fence rails, her hands shaking but her purpose clear. Blaze was too panicked to notice her at first, all his attention on the halter that held him fast. Eleanor approached him from the side, her hands out, talking in what she hoped was a soothing voice. "Easy, boy. Easy now. Let me help you." Blaze's eye rolled toward her, showing white, and he pulled harder. Eleanor's fear surged, but she pushed it down. "Please," she said, more to herself than the horse. "Please let me do this." She reached out and grabbed the halter where it was caught on the post. The angle was awkward, and Blaze's movement made it difficult, but she managed to work it free. The instant the pressure released, Blaze stopped pulling. He stood there, sides heaving, looking at her with what seemed like surprise. Eleanor's legs gave out, and she sat down hard in the dirt of the corral, her whole body shaking. Blaze took a tentative step toward her, then lowered his head and snuffled at her hair. The gesture was so gentle, so unlike the monster she had feared, that Eleanor started laughing and crying at the same time. That was how Ben found her a few minutes later, sitting in the corral with Blaze standing over her protectively, tears streaming down her face. He vaulted the fence and was at her side in seconds. "Ellie, what happened? Are you hurt?" She looked up at him, her face streaked with dust and tears, and smiled. "I went into the corral," she said wonderingly. "He was caught and I went in and freed him. I was afraid, but I did it anyway." Ben pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her tight. "You amazing woman," he murmured into her hair. "You brave, amazing woman." Eleanor clung to him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, breathing in the scent of him, sun and leather and sage. When he pulled back to look at her face, she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Then he was kissing her, not the chaste kiss from their wedding, but something deeper, full of emotion and need and longing. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and felt something inside her finally settle into place. This was right. He was right. They were right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ben rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "So have I," she whispered back. "Will you let me move back into the house, into our bedroom? I am tired of sleeping in the barn, tired of being apart from you." "Yes," she said simply. "I want that too." That night, Ben came to bed in the house, and Eleanor discovered that marriage meant more than shared space and divided labor. It meant intimacy and vulnerability and trust, all things that had seemed impossible when she first arrived, but now felt natural. Ben was as patient in this as he had been with the horses, careful and gentle, and Eleanor found herself grateful once again for the man she had married. The next morning, Ben suggested it was time for the next step. "You went into the corral yesterday without thinking." "That is good. It means your instinct can override your fear when necessary. But now we need to build on that. Today, I want you to try brushing sage." Eleanor's stomach clenched with anxiety, but she nodded. Sage was the gentlest of the horses, the one who had first let Eleanor touch her. If she was going to try this with any horse, Sage was the right choice. Ben brought Sage out of the corral on a lead rope and tied her to the hitching post near the barn. The mare stood calmly, her gray coat gleaming in the morning sun. Ben demonstrated with the brush, long smooth strokes that made Sage's skin twitch with pleasure. "Your turn," he said, offering Eleanor the brush. Eleanor took it, her hand trembling slightly. She approached Sage slowly, waiting for the panic to hit. It came, a wave of fear that made her heart race, but it was smaller than before. Manageable. She reached out and touched the brush to Sage's shoulder. The mare did not react, just continued standing peacefully. Encouraged, Eleanor tried a stroke with the brush. The motion was awkward at first, but she quickly got the hang of it. Brush, stroke, brush, stroke. The rhythmic motion was almost soothing, and she found herself relaxing. "How does it feel?" Ben asked quietly from where he stood nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. Strange, Eleanor admitted. But not bad. She is so solid, so warm. Horses are prey animals, Ben said. They are built to run from danger. That makes them cautious but also surprisingly gentle if you treat them right. They do not want to hurt you any more than you want to be hurt. Eleanor continued brushing, moving from Sage's shoulder to her back, then down her other side. The mare stood patiently, occasionally turning her head to see what Eleanor was doing but otherwise unbothered. By the time Ben said that was enough, Eleanor's arms were tired, but she felt a sense of accomplishment that was almost overwhelming. "You just groomed a horse," Ben said, pride evident in his voice. "A month ago, you could not even look at one without panicking. Now you are grooming one. Do you realize how far you have come?" Eleanor looked at Sage, really looked, and saw not a monster but an animal that had stood patiently while a nervous woman learned to touch her. "I do," she said softly. "I really do." Over the next few weeks, grooming became a regular part of Eleanor's routine. She worked with Sage every day, and gradually Ben introduced her to the other horses. Each one required a period of adjustment, but the fear was becoming more manageable, more like a cautious respect than outright terror. The day Ben suggested she try riding was both expected and shocking. They had been building toward this, she knew, but the idea of actually sitting on a horse still made her feel sick with anxiety. "Not yet," she said immediately. "I am not ready." "All right," Ben said easily. "Tell me when you are. There is no rush." But there was a rush, at least in Eleanor's mind. She could see how much time Ben lost by having to work around her fear. He could not ask her to ride out to help check on the cattle, could not teach her to do tasks that required being on horseback. She was holding him back, and she knew it. A week later, she brought it up herself. "I want to try riding," she said over breakfast one morning. "I am still scared, but I think I need to do it." Ben studied her face for a long moment. "If you are sure, we will take it very slowly. We will start with you just sitting on Sage while I hold her. You would not go anywhere, just get used to the feeling of being on her back." "Would that work?" Eleanor nodded, her mouth too dry for words. That afternoon they began. Ben brought Sage to the hitching post and saddled her, explaining each step as he worked. Then he led her to the mounting block, a sturdy wooden step he had built specifically for this purpose. "Stand on the block," he instructed. "That will put you at the right height to swing your leg over." Eleanor climbed onto the block, her legs feeling like water. From this height, Sage's back looked impossibly far away. Ben held the mare's head, speaking to her in a low, calming voice. "I am going to help you get your foot in the stirrup," he said. "Then I will boost you up and you will swing your other leg over. I will hold Sage the whole time. She will not move unless I tell her to. Ready?" "No," Eleanor said honestly, "but let us do it anyway." With Ben's help, she got her left foot in the stirrup. Then his hands were on her waist, lifting her with that easy strength she had come to rely on. For a moment, she was suspended between earth and horse, and then she was sitting in the saddle, higher off the ground than she had been since she was 7 years old. The panic hit immediately, a crushing wave of terror that made her vision narrow. She could feel the horse beneath her, feel the power in those muscles, and all she could think about was falling, being trampled, dying the way her father had died. "Ellie." Ben's voice cut through the panic. "Look at me. Look at my face." She forced her eyes to focus on him. He was standing at Sage's head, one hand on the bridle, his expression calm and confident. "You are safe," he said firmly. "Sage is not moving. I am not going to let her move. You are sitting on a horse and you are safe. Breathe with me. In, out, in, out." Eleanor followed his breathing, matching her rhythm to his. Slowly, very slowly, the panic began to recede. She could still feel it, hovering at the edges of her awareness, but it was not consuming her. "That is it," Ben encouraged. "You are doing so well." "How does it feel?" "Terrifying," Eleanor admitted, her voice shaky. "But I am still here. I have not fallen." "No, you have not. Sage is steady as a rock. She would not hurt you for the world." He stroked the mare's neck. "Do you want to stay up there a bit longer, or would you like to get down?" "Stay," Eleanor said, surprising herself. "I want to stay a little longer." So they stood there, Eleanor sitting rigid in the saddle, Ben holding Sage, until Eleanor's breathing had returned to normal, and she felt she had proven something to herself. Then Ben helped her down, and she stood on solid ground again, her legs shaky but her spirit soaring. "I did it," she said, looking up at Ben with wonder in her eyes. "I sat on a horse." He pulled her into a hug, holding her close. "You did more than that. You faced your worst fear and did not let it beat you. I am so proud of you, Ellie." That night, as they lay in bed together, Eleanor found herself thinking about her journey. 3 months ago, she had been in Philadelphia, working in a factory with no prospects and no hope. Now she was in Wyoming, married to a good man, living on a ranch and conquering the fear that had held her captive for 16 years. It seemed impossible, but it was real. "Ben," she said into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for being patient with me, for not giving up on me." She felt him shift closer, his arm coming around her waist. "I did not do anything special. You did all the hard work. You gave me a reason to try. That is more than anyone else has done." He kissed the top of her head. "You gave me a reason to hope." "I had accepted that I would probably spend my life alone out here. Then your first letter arrived, and I thought maybe there was a chance for something more. You took a risk coming here, Ellie. I am grateful every day that you did." The riding lessons continued. Each day, Eleanor sat in the saddle a little longer, and gradually, Ben began to lead Sage around the corral while Eleanor rode. The first time Sage moved beneath her, Eleanor had to fight back panic, but Ben's steady presence and calm voice helped her through it. After a week, she could ride around the corral without feeling like she was going to die. "You are ready for the next step," Ben announced one morning. "Today, you are going to ride Sage by yourself. I will be right beside you on Ranger, but you will be controlling her." Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse, but she stopped herself. She had come so far. She could do this. "All right," she said. "Show me what to do." Ben taught her the basics of using the reins, how to signal Sage to walk, stop, and turn. The mare responded beautifully, as though she understood that Eleanor needed her to be gentle. With Ben riding beside her, Eleanor guided Sage around the corral, then out into the open area near the barn. The feeling of moving on horseback, of actually controlling the animal rather than just sitting passively, was different than she had expected. There was a sense of partnership, of working together with the horse. "How are you doing?" Ben called. "Good," Eleanor called back, and realized with surprise that she meant it. "This is actually good." By the end of the afternoon, Eleanor had ridden Sage in a wide circle around the house and outbuildings, Ben beside her the entire time. When they finally stopped and she dismounted, her legs were sore and her back ached, but she felt triumphant. "I can ride," she said, looking at Ben with shining eyes. "I can actually ride a horse." "You can," he agreed, grinning at her. "Which means you can help me with the ranch work now." "If you want to, that is." "I want to," she said immediately. "I want to be a real partner to you, not just someone you have to work around." So Eleanor became a ranch wife in truth. She learned to ride out with Ben to check on the cattle, to help drive them from one pasture to another. She learned to spot signs of illness or injury in the animals, both horses and cattle. She learned to rope, though she was not very good at it yet, and to repair fence, and to read the weather in the endless Wyoming sky. The work was hard. harder than anything she had done in the factory, but it was satisfying in a way that factory work had never been. She could see the results of her labor, could see the ranch improving and growing. And she could see the pride in Ben's eyes when he looked at her, the appreciation for her efforts. As autumn approached, bringing cooler weather and the prospect of winter, Eleanor realized she had not thought about Philadelphia in weeks. This was her home now, this ranch with its wide skies and hard work and the horses she had learned to love despite everything. And Ben was her home too, the man she had married as a stranger but had come to love deeply. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor took Ben's hand. "I have something to tell you," she said. He looked at her with immediate concern. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Quite the opposite, actually." She took a deep breath, nervous and excited at once. "I am with child. The baby should come in the spring." The expression that crossed Ben's face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. Shock, joy, wonder, all mingled together. Then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she might break. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see that he was. "Happy does not begin to cover it. I am overwhelmed. I am grateful. I am terrified." He pulled back to look at her. "Are you all right? Do you feel well? Should you be riding? Should you be working?" She laughed at his sudden anxiety. "I am fine. Women have been having babies while doing ranch work since there have been ranches. I will let you know if I need to slow down, but for now, I am well." The winter was mild that year, and Eleanor was grateful. As her belly grew, the physical work became more difficult, but she continued to ride and help with the lighter tasks until Ben finally put his foot down in March and insisted she stay close to the house. By then, she was too uncomfortable to argue much. The baby came on a bright April morning, brought into the world with the help of a neighbor woman who had experience in such matters. Ben paced outside the bedroom door, looking more frightened than Eleanor had ever seen him face down an ornery bull. But when the woman finally called him in to meet his son, his face transformed. Eleanor, exhausted but exhilarated, held the tiny bundle and watched as Ben approached with reverent steps. "A boy," she said softly. "I thought we could name him Thomas, after your father." Ben reached out and gently touched his son's tiny hand, his eyes wet with tears. "Thomas Benjamin Irwin. It is perfect. He is perfect." The baby opened his eyes, blue like his father's, and looked up at them with the vague focus of a newborn. Eleanor felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. This was her family, her life, built from fear and courage and love. As spring turned to summer, Eleanor adjusted to motherhood while continuing to work alongside Ben on the ranch. It was not easy, balancing the needs of a baby with the demands of ranch life, but they managed. Ben proved to be a devoted father, taking Thomas out with him in a sling Eleanor had made, letting the baby sleep in a cradle under a tree while he worked nearby. Thomas grew quickly, a healthy, happy child who seemed to inherit his father's disposition. He rarely cried and seemed content wherever he was, as long as one of his parents was in sight. Eleanor would often ride out to find Ben working in one of the pastures, Thomas strapped to his back or napping in the wagon, and her heart would swell with love for both of them. One afternoon in late summer, when Thomas was about 4 months old, Eleanor rode Sage out to where Ben was mending fence. She had Thomas in a sling against her chest, and the baby was awake and looking around with interest. She stopped beside Ben, and he looked up with a smile. "I was thinking," she said, "about that first day I arrived, how terrified I was of even seeing a horse. If someone had told me that a year later I would be riding with our baby, I would have thought they were insane." Ben stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. "You have come a long way." "We have come a long way," she corrected. "I could not have done it without your patience, without you believing I could overcome my fear when I did not believe it myself." He reached up and took her hand, his calloused thumb stroking across her knuckles. "You had the courage all along. You came all this way to marry a stranger, to start a new life in a place you knew would force you to face your worst fear. That takes more bravery than most people will ever need." Eleanor looked down at him. This man she had known for little more than a year, but felt like she had known forever. "I love you," she said. "I do not think I have said that enough. I love you, Ben Irwin. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have." "I love you too," he said, his eyes bright. "You made this house a home, made this ranch into something I am proud of. You gave me a family. That is more than I ever hoped for." Thomas made a gurgling sound as though adding his agreement, and they both laughed. Ben reached up and gently touched his son's cheek, then leaned in to kiss Eleanor. It was a sweet kiss, full of promise and contentment. As the years passed, the Broken Creek Ranch grew and prospered. Ben and Eleanor added more cattle, improved the horse breeding program, and slowly built their operation into one of the most respected in the area. Eleanor became known for her skill with horses, and people would sometimes bring problem animals to her, knowing she had a gift for gentling them. She always found it ironic that she, who had been so terrified of horses, had become someone others turned to for horse expertise. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. When he was 4, a second child joined the family, a daughter they named Sarah with dark curls and a quick smile. Then, 3 years after that, another son they called Daniel, who proved to be the most adventurous of the 3. Eleanor taught all her children to respect horses, but not to fear them. She told them about their grandfather, about the accident that had shaped her life. But she also taught them that fear could be overcome with patience and determination. They grew up riding as naturally as they walked, and watching them race across the prairie on their ponies, Eleanor felt a bittersweet mixture of pride and wonder. The ranch became a gathering place for neighbors and travelers. Eleanor's cooking was legendary, and Ben's knowledge of ranching was freely shared with newcomers who needed guidance. They built additional rooms onto the house as the family grew, added a larger barn, and planted trees around the house that provided shade in summer. There were hard times too, of course. A drought one year that tested their reserves, a winter so harsh they lost several head of cattle, the usual injuries and illnesses that came with frontier life. But they faced each challenge together, their partnership stronger for having been forged in the crucible of Eleanor's fear and Ben's patience. On their 10th anniversary, Ben surprised Eleanor with a gift. He led her outside to find a beautiful black mare tied to the hitching post, her coat gleaming like silk in the sun. "She is yours," he said. "Sage is getting older and you need a younger horse. I trained this one myself, made sure she is as gentle as they come. Her name is Midnight." Eleanor approached the mare slowly, marveling at her beauty. Midnight stood quietly, her dark eyes intelligent and calm. Eleanor ran her hand down the horse's neck, feeling the warmth of her, the solidness, and felt no fear at all, just appreciation and love. "She is beautiful," Eleanor said. "Thank you." "Thank you," Ben replied, pulling her close, "for taking a chance on me all those years ago, for being brave enough to face your fear, for giving me the best 10 years of my life." Eleanor leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "They have been the best years of mine, too. I cannot imagine my life without you, without this place, without our children." As they stood there, holding each other, Thomas came running around the corner of the house with Sarah and Daniel in tow. "Ma, Pa, can we go riding? please." Eleanor laughed and pulled away from Ben. "Let me saddle Midnight and we will all go for a ride. How does that sound?" The children cheered and ran to get their horses ready. Ben helped Eleanor saddle Midnight, and soon the whole family was mounted and heading out across the prairie. Eleanor rode beside Ben, the children ranging ahead on their smaller horses, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was everything she had never known she wanted. A home, a family, work that mattered, and a partner who had seen past her fear to the person she could become. The journey from Philadelphia to Wyoming had been about more than physical distance. It had been about transformation, about learning that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. As they rode, the sun warm on their faces and the wind carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers, Eleanor thought about the girl who had arrived on that stagecoach so many years ago, too frightened to even look at the horses pulling it. She wished she could tell that girl that everything would be all right, that the terror would fade, that on the other side of fear was a life richer and more fulfilling than she could imagine. But perhaps that girl had known, deep down. Perhaps that was why she had had the courage to board that train in the first place, to travel across the country, to marry a stranger, to face the very thing that terrified her most. Perhaps she had known, in some part of herself she could not quite access, that the only way to truly live was to stop letting fear make her choices for her. The children called out that they had found a rabbit warren, and could they stop to watch? Ben looked at Eleanor with a smile, and she nodded. They all dismounted, hobbling the horses loosely and settling on the grass to watch the rabbits darting in and out of their holes. Thomas pointed out different individuals. Sarah made up stories about rabbit families, and Daniel tried unsuccessfully to get close enough to touch one. Eleanor sat with her back against a rock, Ben beside her, and watched her children play. This moment, this ordinary, perfect moment, was what she had been seeking when she answered that advertisement all those years ago. Not adventure or riches, but belonging, connection, love. "What are you thinking about?" Ben asked quietly. "How grateful I am," she said, "for everything, for you." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "The feeling is entirely mutual." As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they gathered the children and headed home. The ranch buildings came into view, solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where Eleanor had banked the fire that morning. Chickens scattered as they rode into the yard, and the dog came running to greet them, tail wagging furiously. They dismounted and began unsaddling the horses, the children helping with the easy tasks while Eleanor and Ben handled the rest. It was a familiar routine, comfortable and grounding. Eleanor brushed down Midnight, appreciating the mare's patient disposition, and turned her out into the pasture with the other horses. As she watched the horses running together, playing and grazing in the evening light, she marveled again at how far she had come. These animals that had once represented her deepest fear now represented freedom and partnership and joy. They were no longer monsters but friends, tools and companions. "Ma," Sarah appeared at her elbow, her small hand slipping into Eleanor's. "Will you teach me to braid Daisy's mane tomorrow? I want her to look pretty." "Of course, sweetheart," Eleanor said, squeezing her daughter's hand. "We will do it first thing after breakfast." That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Eleanor and Ben sat together on the porch as they often did. The stars were brilliant in the clear sky, more stars than Eleanor had ever seen in Philadelphia, and the air was cool and sweet. "Do you ever regret it?" Ben asked suddenly. "Leaving Philadelphia, coming here?" Eleanor turned to him, surprised by the question. "Never, not even for a moment." "Do you regret advertising for a mail-order bride?" He laughed softly. I regret the anxiety of waiting for you to arrive, wondering if you would be anything like your letters. But the reality has exceeded my wildest hopes. You are stronger than you know, Ellie. You always have been." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid comfort of his presence. "I did not feel strong when I arrived. I felt like a coward. Cowards do not get on stagecoaches headed into the unknown. Cowards do not face their fears head-on. You were brave from the beginning. You just did not realize it yet." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. An owl hooted in the distance, cattle shifted in their sleep, and somewhere a coyote called to its pack. These were the sounds of home now, as familiar to Eleanor as her own heartbeat. "I was thinking," Ben said eventually, "that maybe next spring we should consider expanding the horse operation. There is a lot of demand for well-trained horses, and you have a real gift for working with them. We could build another corral, maybe hire a hand to help with the cattle so we can focus more on the horses." Eleanor considered this, intrigued by the idea. "I would like that. Working with the horses is what I enjoy most about ranch work." "Then that is what we will do. We will start planning it out this winter, and when spring comes, we will begin construction." The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise. There would be challenges, Eleanor knew. There always were. But she also knew that they would face those challenges together, with the same patience and determination that had gotten them through everything so far. When they finally went inside, Eleanor paused at the door to look back at the land spread out before them. The ranch, their home, built with hard work and hope and love. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the fear she had overcome, about the man who had stood beside her through it all. "Thank you," she whispered into the night, though she was not sure who she was thanking. Ben, perhaps, or fate, or simply the courage she had found somewhere deep within herself to take that first step into the unknown. Inside, she checked on each of the children, tucking blankets around sleeping forms and pressing kisses to warm foreheads. Thomas, tall for his age already, lying sprawled across his bed. Sarah, curled into a ball with her favorite doll clutched in her arms. Daniel, the baby though he would hate being called that, one thumb in his mouth despite their efforts to break the habit. These were her children, her legacy, proof that she had built something lasting and good from the ashes of her fear. They would grow up knowing horses as friends rather than enemies, would learn that courage meant facing what frightened you rather than running from it. They would have opportunities she had never had, would know love and security in a way she had only dreamed of as a child, in the bedroom she shared with Ben. Eleanor changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed. Ben joined her moments later, and she curled into his side, her head on his chest where she could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. "I love you," she murmured, half asleep already. "I love you too," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "Sleep well." Eleanor drifted off to sleep, content and peaceful, no longer haunted by nightmares of rearing horses and tragedy. Instead, she dreamed of wide open spaces and galloping horses, of her children laughing and Ben's smile, of a future bright with hope. The years continued to pass, measured in seasons of planting and harvest, in foals born and cattle sold, in children growing and changing. Eleanor and Ben worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word, building their ranch into a place of prosperity and happiness. The horse breeding program flourished under Eleanor's skilled management, and the Broken Creek name became synonymous with quality throughout Wyoming Territory. Thomas, at 18, was already nearly as tall as his father and showed promise of being an excellent rancher himself. Sarah, at 14, had inherited her mother's way with horses and spent every spare moment in the barns. Daniel, at 11, was the wild one, always getting into scrapes but possessing a good heart, and his father's steady disposition underneath the adventurous exterior. Eleanor, now in her early 40s, still rode every day, still worked alongside Ben as she had since those early days. Her hair had threads of silver now, and lines had formed around her eyes. But Ben still looked at her the way he had on their wedding day, with love and admiration and gratitude. On a warm summer evening, the whole family gathered on the porch for supper, a tradition Eleanor had insisted on maintaining no matter how busy they were. The table was laden with food from their own garden and chickens, beef from their own cattle, bread she had baked that morning. As they ate and talked and laughed together, Eleanor looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world and felt her heart swell with gratitude. "Ma," Thomas said, looking up from his plate, "Old Man Henderson wants to know if you would be willing to work with that mare of his that no one can handle. He said if anyone can gentle her, it is you." Eleanor smiled. "Tell him to bring her by next week. I will take a look." "You are not worried she will be too much for you?" Ben asked, though his tone was teasing rather than serious. He knew better than anyone what Eleanor was capable of. "I have faced worse than a stubborn mare," Eleanor said with a laugh. "Remember Blaze when we first got him? That horse tried to kick down the barn door. And you gentled him into the best working horse we ever had," Ben agreed. "I should have known better than to doubt you." As the conversation continued around her, Eleanor let herself sink into the moment, memorizing it. Someday, when she was old and her children had ranches of their own, she would look back on evenings like this and remember how blessed she had been. Not because her life had been easy, it had not, but because she had had the courage to reach for something better and the good fortune to find a partner who believed in her. After supper, as the children cleared the dishes, Ben took Eleanor's hand and led her away from the house, out toward the pastures where the horses grazed in the evening light. They walked in companionable silence until they reached the fence, leaning against it side by side. "Do you remember the first time you touched Sage through this fence?" Ben asked. "I remember being terrified," Eleanor said. "I remember thinking I could not possibly do what you were asking. But you did it anyway. That is the thing about you, Ellie. You have always done what needed to be done, even when you were afraid." She turned to look at him, this man who had seen something in her letters that made him take a chance on a stranger. His face was more weathered now, his hair showing gray at the temples, but his eyes were the same, that clear gray blue that had made her feel safe from the first moment she met him. "I could not have done any of it without you," she said. "You gave me the space to be afraid and the encouragement to try anyway. That is a rare gift, Ben." He pulled her close, and they stood wrapped in each other's arms as the sun set in a blaze of color across the wide Wyoming sky. Around them, the ranch bustled with life, horses whinnying, cattle lowing, their children's voices drifting from the house. It was everything Eleanor had never known she needed, everything she had been too afraid to hope for. "I am glad you answered my advertisement," Ben said softly. "I am glad you were brave enough to get on that train. I am glad you were patient enough to teach a terrified woman to ride," Eleanor replied. "I am glad you saw past my fear to who I could become." As the last light faded and the stars began to appear, they walked back to the house hand in hand. Inside, warmth and light and family waited. Outside, the ranch they had built together stretched into the darkness, a testament to patience, courage, and love. Eleanor's story had started with fear, with a traumatic memory that had shaped her life for 16 years. But it had transformed into something beautiful, something she could never have imagined when she was that frightened woman stepping off the stagecoach in Douglas. She had learned that fear did not have to be a prison, that with patience and support and determination, even the deepest terror could be overcome. And she had learned about love, real love, the kind that saw your weaknesses and helped you become stronger, that celebrated your victories and supported you through failures. Ben had given her that, had been that for her, and in return, she had given him a home and a family and a partnership built on mutual respect and affection. As they settled into bed that night, Eleanor thought about the full circle her life had made. From that little girl watching in horror as her father died, to the terrified young woman arriving in an unknown land, to the confident rancher and mother she had become. It had not been an easy journey, but it had been worth every difficult step. "What are you thinking about?" Ben murmured in the darkness. "About how far I have come," Eleanor said. "About how grateful I am for every moment, even the hard ones, because they brought me here." "Where is here?" "Home," she said simply. "With you where I belong." Ben kissed her forehead gently. "You have always belonged here, from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach. It just took a while for you to realize it." Eleanor smiled in the darkness, contentment washing over her like a warm wave. He was right, of course. This had always been where she was meant to be. She just had had to be brave enough to find it, and patient enough with herself to learn how to stay. As she drifted toward sleep, her last conscious thought was of gratitude. For Ben, for their children, for the horses she had learned to love, for the land that had become her home, and for the courage she had found within herself when she needed it most. It had not been the journey she expected when she answered that advertisement, but it had been the journey she needed. And she would not change a single moment of it. The end.